Good afternoon and welcome to the September 20th meeting of the Santa Rosa City Council. Madam Clerk, could you announce the roll, please?
Let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Carstrom.
Thank you very much. At this point, I will report out on the closed session. The council did meet and discuss the matter at hand and gave direction to staff. Moving on to, let's see, we have no study session this afternoon. And let's see, we have no proclamations or presentations. We have no staff briefings. City manager's report.
Nothing to report.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney.
I have nothing to report.
Thank you. Abstention of council by council members? Any abstentions other than what I'm going to be mentioning? And I will be leaving the chamber for, Mr. Vice Mayor, what's our number? 12.3 as the issue has to do with rent stabilization and just cause eviction, so I will be leaving the chamber when we get to that item. Moving on to mayors and council members' reports. Who would like to start? If there are any reports this evening, Mr. Oliveros.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll begin with festivities. It was a beautiful, warm weekend. Sunday, I did attend the Fiesta de Independencia at the Luther Burbank Center for the Arts. As you recall, it is part of our Hispanic Heritage Month, which we're in the middle of now. And then I also attended one of the events of the Gang Prevention Awareness Week. This was the exhibition boxing matches that were going on at the Santa Rosa Plaza. Very well attended, big crowd. And I remind you that tomorrow there is a gang prevention seminar at the Finley Center. And then this Saturday will be the annual Day and Night Festival at Martin Luther King Jr. Park. And I encourage the community to come out and attend that and celebrate with us. Last Thursday, we did have our monthly medical cannabis subcommittee meeting. We continue to work on some of the details related to commercial cultivation uses and also discussions related to dispensaries. A lot of detailed work going on before we bring recommendations to the council and also have an opportunity to loop out to the community as well to try to gather some input on what they want to see here in Santa Rosa. Yesterday we had our homeless policy subcommittee meeting, and we did have some discussions related to our homeless services strategy, our draft emergency declaration work plan, and a lot of discussion related to the CHAP, the Community Homeless Assistance Program, which we deemed that a priority of the committee, given the weather change coming upon us. So hopefully we will have some recommendations coming back to the entire council in a few weeks to get that going and getting some of our community members to get engaged in some of these efforts.
Excellent, thank you. Any other reports? Mr. Wysocki.
Mr. City Manager, did you want to report on the California Public Utilities Commission decision? I mean, it's better coming from you than from me.
No, I would defer to the council member if he wanted to report.
Okay. As you all probably know by now, California Public Utilities Commission voted for the city's appeal to have an at-grade crossing at Jennings, saving, yeah, it's a huge yay. Saving a huge construction of an overcrossing and probably a net savings of $6-7 million of taxpayer money. So I wanted to thank staff, in particular Jason Nutt, who did an excellent job in presenting our case as to why one size does not fit all.
Excellent, thank you. It is all good news in that arena. Ms. Combs.
I attended a meeting of the ABAG Regional Planning, again. Would like to report that have mixed feelings about reporting that the ABAG Executive Director, Ezra Rapport, has resigned. And it will be interesting to see the process for filling that seat since the unification of ABAG and MTC staff. The ABAG 2040 report, we have an opportunity to comment on it up to, I think it's October 20th or 24th, and I'm hoping that we will have some staff comments to review with that. As I'm vice chair of that committee, but I'm chair of the Housing Policy Committee. And we're looking at prospects for a regional housing trust fund. So I will bring back information about sort of the three components of a regional housing trust fund as we work through them. The where's the money coming from, the how's it structured, and the how's it's going to be spent category. We have to sort that out too. So I'll be bringing that back for feedback because I want to make sure that if we establish a regional fund, that obviously we want to make sure that our North Bay region receives a proportionate amount of funding. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other report? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Attended Mike Brune's, president of the Sierra Club's talk. Very interesting conversation that he had, predominantly about events at the national level. And wanted to just do a shout out to the Glendy cultural event that was over the weekend. Interesting, multicultural, sort of Greekish, sort of Caucasus, a variety of interesting cultural activities and foods at the Glendy event this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other reports, council? I'll just report out that on Saturday, I attended also one of the Gang Prevention Awareness Week gatherings, celebrations at Southwest Community Park, and they had a talent show. And, these kids, not all kids, but mainly kids, work so hard and do such a great job. It was a real pleasure to be there. It was a really warm day. Luckily, they were on a stage with some shade, but they were having a ball, and I'm honored to be there and actually played a taiko drum, so it didn't do too badly. So. And that's all I have for reports. Our next item is 10.2.1, a request for the discussion on Measure K come before the council. Mr. Corsi, would you like to reiterate your original motion or what you are suggesting the council take on?
Yes, as you'll recall, we had a presentation about Measure K, short presentation during public appearances from the North Bay Director of Greenbelt Alliance. And Measure K is an extension of our greenbelts in Sonoma County. This is a policy that has benefited us for 20 years. It was passed with 70% of the vote 2 decades ago. It's been good for agriculture, it's good for the environment, and it's good for our city. It helps us with our city-centered growth policies. And it's just plain good public policy. It's been working for 20 years. I'd like us to endorse the measure that will keep it in place for the next 20 years.
Thank you.
If that's a motion, I'm seconding
It
it.
sounds like a motion and a second. And discussion, council? All right, and this is to place it on the agenda for discussion.
Right.
Thank you. And we do have one card on this item. Terry? Sure, we'll get it operated for you.
Good evening, Mayor Sawyer.
Yeah, lift your mic. There you go.
Okay, great. Good evening, Mayor Sawyer, council members, staff and the public. My name is Terry Shore. I am the North Bay Regional Director for Greenbelt Alliance and also the campaign manager for Measure K. So thank you very much, City Council, for considering putting this on your agenda for potential endorsement of this very important measure to renew voter protections for community separators. For another 20 years. They've been in place for 20 years, and it's very important to the city of Santa Rosa because it's the companion measure in the county to the city's urban growth boundary. And I gave you a little bit of info last time, But since we spoke a week ago, was it? The Press Democrat has endorsed Measure K very strongly. Previously, the Argus Courier has, in Petaluma, endorsed. And we have a huge list of more than 200 people who have endorsed Measure K to date. And that includes a number of organizations. And one thing that I'm really happy to report is that we just learned today that the Sonoma County Alliance Political Action Committee is endorsing Measure K. So we have a broad coalition, and we really urge the Santa Rosa City Council to consider discussing it, because really we need to reach the voters. So all of us who are following policy are on board, many community members and leaders, but for the City Council of Santa Rosa to discuss it and endorse it, that will help voter education. There are a lot of measures out there. There's confusion about what's a tax measure, what isn't. In fact, I got an email today from a voter that said, can you tell me more about Measure J and community separators? And I was like, thank you very much. Measure K is for keep our community separators. Measure J is another great measure, county measure for our regional parks. So I really hope you will consider taking this up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Short. Those are all the cards that I have on this item, so I'll bring it back to the council. Any further comments, council, before we vote? All right, and your votes, please. And we have 6 ayes with Councilmember Carlstrom being absent.
At this point, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask that we consider agendizing Measure Y, the library measure, at a future meeting. So if we could bring that up for consideration, I would appreciate it.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion second, the first step of the process. Thank you. I know, this is, yeah, there are a lot of propositions, and I have been, with your assistance, careful in how we move forward with these requests and keeping it to our process, because staff is up to their necks in projects. So I appreciate the council being willing to go through the same process with these propositions as we do with the rest of our work. So thank you very much. Moving on to approval of minutes, we have August 2nd and August 9th. Any changes to those minutes, council? Or recommended changes? Seeing none, they'll be accepted as submitted. Moving on to consent, Mr. McGlynn.
Item 12.1, resolution, amendment to the council policy 000-048, policy to designate general fund funding for homeless and affordable housing production, increasing the real property transfer tax funding for homeless and affordable housing production to 25%. Item 12.2, resolution, delegation of authority to execute intergovernmental agreements with the County of Sonoma for remote access to the Recorder's Office public information. Item 12.3, resolution, revision of the policy concerning rent stabilization, capital improvement plans, RS-CIP, to include demolition of rental units and immediate reconstruction of rental units on the same property, and to clarify wording in the policy concerning the program administrator's calculation of an assumed interest rate for rent stabilization capital improvements.
Thank you, Mr. McGlynn, and I will ask that we pull 12.3 for a separate vote. Council, questions on 12.1 and 12.2?
Can someone explain 12.2 a little bit more fully? I would just like a quick rundown on what 12.2 means.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Council. Mayor Sawyer. Sorry. I'm Brad Hoffman, Supervising Land Surveyor and Public Works. So was there a specific question? You just want a little bit more explanation? Currently, we have an agreement that just expired that allowed our access to the county recorder's office documents. That's remotely in our office.
A little closer if you could.
Remotely in our office. So we have access to recorded documents. This agreement has expired, and we would like to go forward with it. It's a great resource for us to do research and keeps us from having to drive to the county recorder's office and, in fact, pay $1.75 per sheet when we print. So this is all within our office.
So this, we're not talking about the purchase of new or additional equipment.
No, this is purely for them to recoup their costs.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, council? All right. Thank you. And I have one card on 12.1, Ms. Seeley.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. You very likely were going to vote for this. Who wouldn't want to vote for increasing the real property transfer tax to 25% to fund affordable housing? I only put in a card because I just imagined that there being a no vote and thinking, why didn't I get up there and say something? This is so sensible. Please do it. Thanks.
Thank you. And keep in mind that we are changing the formula, or changing the amount that goes of the percentage that we take in, not the percentage of the tax.
May I ask a question about
Certainly.
this? Is it possible for us at this time, based on the way it's been noticed, to change the number from 25% to a higher number?
Yes, it is. That's within your discretion.
I would like to move to change it to a higher number, for example, 40%.
Is that a motion, Councilman?
That's a motion.
Do we know what the dollar number is?
Again, remember, the dollar number is dependent on the collection of the rate, and so it's forecasted at increments of $185,000. I will remind council that we are spending well over that amount as we currently did, our current distribution rate, but again, this is the council policy for direction.
So if I can spit that back, it's kind of form over substance if we increase our allocation rate since we're already spending more.
I'm not saying that. I'm just pointing out the fact that you do spend more, and that the current proposal is to raise this by equivalent of $185,000 if we calculated the current receipt rate.
Our community has indicated a lack of trust over some issues associated with this item, and that's one of the reasons why, since we are in fact spending more than the amount of 40%, I'm suggesting that we move the 40% forward as a way of showing the good faith to the community with regard to this transfer tax.
Other comments, council? Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I just recall the same discussion we had during the budget discussions, and there were higher figures, and I think the council voted on the 25%. So my preference would be to keep it the 25% during next either budget setting or goal setting. If we want to increase it, let's increase it. But I think we already had this discussion, and I'm in favor of just keeping it at the 25, which is a 5% increase to the tune of $185K that we start with. I totally recognize we put much more into these areas than just the real property transfer tax portion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And for a matter of process, I should entertain a second before we have any further discussion. I have a motion on the floor. I have no second.
Okay, no second.
No. So motion dies for lack of a second. So your votes, council, on the original, yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice Mayor.
I'd move consent items 12.1 and 12.2 and wait for the reading the text.
Second. Thank you. And your votes? And I have 6 ayes. Thank you very much. And I will excuse myself for the next item.
I have a question of staff, if I may.
That would be wonderful.
Thank you. Do we know if Ms. Karlstrom is on her way? Do we have knowledge of that?
If you give me a second, I can see if we've received any notification at this time.
If you don't mind, I would appreciate a delay until I know whether she's on her way or not.
If I could ask the city attorney, do we need, sorry.
I apologize. I was
That's all right.
checking to see if I had anything.
Do we need, on items 12.3, do we need 3 votes or 4 votes? Do we need a majority or do we need 4 votes?
You need a majority of the full composition of council.
Thank you.
May I ask the city attorney, Mr. Vice Mayor, if I may?
Oh, please, go ahead.
Sometimes I'm polite. I'm wondering if the motion does not pass at this point, can it come back to us at a future date?
If there's no majority, in other words, no 4 votes one way or the other, yes, it would come back to you. It's sort of in limbo at that point.
Okay, and if it comes back to us, what are the ramifications with regard to implementation? Does it have does it delay something? Do we have a gap? Do we have knowledge of any problem that's created by a delay in this item?
It's a resolution for a policy that would take effect immediately upon adoption of the resolution.
Okay.
If it were pushed to next week, it would go into effect next week.
Next week, okay, that's what I needed to know.
And again, Madam City Attorney, the intent of this was to clarify and allow actually a property owner who wanted to do something with the property and keep it, used to be a rental unit, want to tear it down, build a new rental unit, it would allow for that to occur, and then the new building would not be subjected to the rent stabilization because it'd be built after 1995. Is that correct? In essence, I know there's others, but
There are other nuances, but that is correct.
Thank you.
It also makes clear that the tenant evicted for reasons that weren't for cause. So in that example, it would make clear that that tenant would get relocation benefits.
correct.
But the newly constructed unit, if it's issued a certificate of occupancy, a new certificate of occupancy, it would not be subject to the ordinance. There's also one other piece that this does. Per council's direction, there was a clarification that needed to be made as to the calculation of interest, and that small modification was made to clarify the order of operations in the calculation.
Great. Thank you.
I don't have a status update to report.
Okay,
Mr. Oliver, did you have a?
Yeah, no, just, I guess, a comment, I guess. It would be not necessarily a question, but, given where we've gone with the rent stabilization, this looks like some good relief for those who want to upgrade properties, even though there are some other conditions associated with it. I think it's a step in the right direction to provide that relief.
Thank you.
thank you for that assurance, and I won't pull the item.
Mr. Corsi, would you like to have this item?
Yes, I'll move a resolution, a revision of the policy concerning rent stabilization, capital improvement plans, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
On 12.3.
Any other comments? Your votes, please. And we have 5 ayes.
Thank you, and I apologize for creating delays.
Since it's not quite 5 o'clock yet, hopefully the mayor is on his way back. Mr. McGlynn, 14.1.
Item 14.1, report. Sonoma Clean Power update on performance and possible service to Mendocino County. Jeff Cyphers, CEO of Sonoma Clean Power, presenting.
Good afternoon. Thank you for, Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting Sonoma Clean Power here. I'm joined up here with Steve Shoup, and also we have, I believe, 6 staff members from Sonoma Clean Power joining us as well. And I think this update is to give you a quick progress report on what we've achieved at Sonoma Clean Power, and then talk about 2 items really, a joint powers agreement update and refresh, and possible service to Mendocino County. And so I think I'll start with just what's happened since May of 2014 when Santa Rosa joined Sonoma Clean Power and we started receiving service. And the first is a big picture comment, and that is that community choice, the service of providing competitive electric generation alternatives to the distribution utility, in our case that's PG&E, has become very popular in California. So just in the last year, we've gone from 3 operating programs with Marin and Sonoma and Lancaster to 5, and we're expecting at least 1 more next year, probably 3. And PG&E is now estimating, in fact, this is out of date, they're now estimating more than half of all their customers will be served by community choice within 10 to 12 years. So the comment at the bottom has been actually made more aggressive by PG&E. And that has to do with really what these programs have been able to achieve as far as local results. And so to give you an example, we have all our eligible cities participating. That means Healdsburg has their own municipal utility, so they don't need us. But in all the cities in Sonoma County, we're serving 88% of the people have chosen to stick with Sonoma Clean Power. And so we're really proud of that result. That's better than the first CCA was able to achieve, and we've recently been bested by San Francisco, who has an even lower opt-out rate. So we'll try and catch up to them next. And as far as environmental performance, and I should comment that we have twin goals. We have economic goals and we have environmental goals. And on the environmental side, one of the things I'm very proud of is in our first year of operations, we managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 48% relative to PG&E. That's big because PG&E is already pretty clean as far as a national utility goes. And so they already have a relatively low emission set of sources. And that number is still subject to final approval by the climate registry that does the validation, but we expect that'll be posted within 2 weeks. And we've also contracted for some local new solar resources. So we have 12.5 megawatts that's contracted to build on irrigation water ponds on docks, and that means we're not using ag land for that, which is a terrific advance, I think, in solar. We've contracted for 3 megawatts total from 3 different small-scale projects, and those are being built by private developers here in the county. And we've completed construction on 70 megawatts of new solar in the Central Valley on rangeland, so it was not prime soils. And something that's not on here because it happened since we developed these slides is we've managed to contract for 46 megawatts of wind power out at the Altamont Pass, where we're replacing old style turbines that were really hazardous to birds with a newer style that's more energy efficient, produces more energy, uses many fewer turbines, and is a much lower risk to birds. So we're really proud of really transforming where our energy is coming from. And on the financial side, we've had other good results. So we've produced over $62 million in direct customer savings on the bottom line after all charges and fees are included since our launch. And that's pretty extraordinary. That's just in a matter of a couple of years. We've also paid out money to customers who have solar on their roofs and make more energy than they use. So you earn credits during the summer and you spend them during the winter if you're a solar customer. And about 1/3 of that money went to public schools. So it was really gratifying to be able to hand out checks as a surprise to some of our public schools. That turns out to be close to a zero subsidy program because we're able to resell that energy at a similar price to other customers. So that's really gratifying. We've also paid off all our startup debt. And we had originally thought that we would take about 5 years to do that, and managed to do it in well under 2 years. Recently, the fee that PG&E charges our customers to make sure they can't possibly lose any profit or shift any costs onto their customers, that fee went up by almost 100% in January. And that was a problem because we didn't get a lot of notice that the fee was going to go up at that kind of scale. So while we take our time and really understand why the fee went up by that amount, we were able to react pretty quickly and reset our rates and our board-approved rates that made sure our customers continued to save money. And so that's something that having local control, I think, is really important by. So our customers are not saving a lot, but they are saving around 2% on their total bills right now. It was higher last year, but having that control turns out to be really valuable. We've also contributed to a reserve fund. Our expenses are right around $14 million, $15 million a month, and so having a reserve fund in excess of $20 million is great, but it's not a lot of reserves, so we are still building toward a credit rating and really aiming for $50 million in reserves within several years, but it's a really good start, and we are ahead of schedule on that as well. We do have a partnership, and we've been working historically with the water agency that helped launch us. I need to mention them as well. They're not on this slide, but we're also developing a more recent partnership working with electric vehicles, shifting people from driving on fossil fuels and gasoline, where most of those revenues are leaving the county, to driving on renewable energy that we can produce and driving cleaner. And that turns out to be a huge win when we're also seeing the significant numbers of electric vehicle models that are available now. There's over 20 models available for sale, and it was probably 3 2 years ago. So there's been this explosion in the electric vehicle market, in quality, in price. There's a lot more affordable electric cars available for sale, and we hope to have an announcement about electric cars next month as well, that we'll be back. So the substantive items before you are really to get some feedback from this council. Our board is the voting body for changing the JPA, and so the city council isn't specifically required to vote on an update to our JPA, but I think we've been traveling around all the cities, and I think your input is valuable to us as well as the director, Councilmember Wysocki, as well, on JPA updates. And so the specifics on that are that we currently have 2 citizen-staffed advisory committees to our board. And one, the Ratepayer Advisory Committee, is tasked with reviewing and weighing in on budget and rates. And the other is tasked with reviewing things like program expenditures, potential contracts, program design and policy. And each of those committees historically has had an interest in the jurisdiction of the other committee. It's hard to weigh in on budget and rates when you don't look at program expenditures and vice versa.
Excuse me, Jeff.
Yeah.
What's the name of the second committee?
Oh, I'm sorry, the Business Operations Committee. So Ratepayer Advisory and Business Operations. And so there's been an interest for a while now in having a merger of the 2 committees, so to speak, so that the same group of people who are reviewing budget and rates and programs can have interest in and insight into all aspects of the economics of the program, and so that the choices can be made more deliberately and with better transparency. And so that was reviewed. The 2 committees have recommended that to our board, and our board is interested in making that change. There's been some clarifications to the purpose of Sonoma Clean Power Authority, and I think the substantive one that generated the most discussion was really around the clarification that fuel switching is within the purview of the agency. And what I mean is, historically, we've talked about electricity in the form of cleaner sources, energy efficiency, and so forth. What we haven't been talking about is something a lot of utilities engage in, such as shifting people from, for example, a natural gas water heater to an efficient electric heat pump water heater running on renewable energy instead of fossil fuel. Similarly, shifting people from driving on gasoline to electricity would be a fuel switching item. So that was clarified in the purposes. And then the power contracting process is something that we're aiming to have the board create a set of guidelines that's more clear so that staff can enter into contracts more efficiently and have better boundaries on what the power contracting limitations are. We anticipate bringing a policy that the board could consider to the next board meeting along with that. But the point of that would be make sure that we don't have a problem with an ad hoc committee that's a long-standing process, so we don't have a Brown Act issue, and also set forth a policy that the board would clarify procurement requirements with. The emergency rate setting authority change, and if you have any technical questions about these things, Councilmember Shoup is here with all the edits. That change is really designed.
Council.
Yeah, so it's, oh, yeah, exactly, sorry. Yeah, did you want to be elected? I meant to say councilor, but I think it came out as council member. So the emergency rate setting measure is really for situations like we experienced recently. So there was a situation where our customers pay for the wires that PG&E manage, and they pay PG&E for that, but they also pay us for the sources of those, and they pay them on the same bill. And a situation arose where the Public Utilities Commission approved a change for PG&E's side of the bill that caused a problem for our customers. So, for example, customers were producing extra solar energy more than they needed, and instead of being credited for that, they were being charged for that. It was a minus times a minus. It was a billing error. And we would like to have the authority at the staff level to correct those kind of errors to protect staff, but only for 90 days, subject to board authorization as quickly as possible following that kind of action in order to protect customers from problems. The purpose of this is not to actually change rates. It's to implement an emergency measure to protect customers. The number 5 is around the board's interest in having only elected officials serving on the Sonoma Clean Power Authority board. And Rohnert Park has offered a concern about that, and their concern is they would like to be able to appoint whom they wish. And so that item has, in the material that was sent to our board, has the board's preferred option, which is the majority of the board would say that only elected officials should serve, and Rohnert Park as an alternate saying that each member can choose who they provide. So either of those options is before our board, and so some feedback on that would be helpful. And number 6 is that the change to the JPA would give our board discretion over how many board seats they have to offer to any new region. So this is really relevant to the Mendocino discussion that's coming next. The current JPA would say that because there are 3 incorporated cities in Mendocino County separate from Ukiah who has a municipal, so Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena, the current JPA would require that they all be offered a seat on the board plus the county, so that would be 4 board seats. The proposed revision would allow the board to offer some lesser amount if it deemed appropriate. And so that's the gist of the JPA agreement revision. So I think because the Mendocino material is relevant to this, maybe shall I go ahead and finish that piece? It's just a few slides, or do you want to ask questions?
Well, let me ask if there's any, right now, if there are any questions, burning questions for the presentation so far. No, let's go ahead.
Great. So then it's asking me to install something. Let's see. Defer. Let's try that. Okay. Let's see if that will work. What do you think? It's taken control. That's odd. Okay, well, I can do it without the overhead. So slides notwithstanding. Oh, super. That's the slide. Great. So historically, several years ago, the County of Mendocino asked Sonoma Clean Power in an informal way to consider offering service to their county. And at the time, both our board and particularly staff and myself really urged caution about moving too fast. And so we said, hang on, we got to get our own county in order. We want to make sure that we're able to serve our own customers in Sonoma County before we even consider that matter. So really what transpired is that, that fairly recently, essentially late last year, our board took up that matter in more earnest. We'd been serving everyone in the county. We'd gotten a couple year or a year and a half at that time of service under our belt. We'd shown we could pay off debt. We felt like we had good billing systems in place and so forth. So our board started to consider that matter. And then just recently, our board made an offer of service with some conditions in it to the county of Mendocino. And let's see, you want me to try this one? The wheel. Huh, all right. Well, all right. So, so back in July, our board voted. There is one slide I would like to show for sure. The rest of them we can get around. Yes. All right, let me stick here. So, so the conditions, just to recap here, that any member wishing to come into the program, so these are incorporated cities and the county, would vote to pass a resolution and essentially authorize service. The A item up here is that our board would enact the change that Mendocino could be offered fewer board seats. And what went out to Mendocino was an offer of 2 board seats, 1 to the county and 1 collectively to any 2 or more incorporated cities. So a total of 2 board seats rather than 4. And the thought behind that was really that if Sonoma Clean Power is going to expand, we didn't want the board to grow much more than it is now, and that to keep it at a manageable size and to preserve some of the gravity here in Sonoma County where we took the risks and started the program. And so then with B, each of those cities would pass those ordinances enabling service, and see that our board formally accept those members. So what's happened so far is our board has recommended the change to the JPA, that's A. Mendocino County has passed resolution and ordinances, and all of the cities are considering that matter right now. Some have introduced the items, and all are expected to be able to complete that process by our next board meeting. And so then on October 13th, our next board meeting, I expect our board will vote on this item about whether or not to accept Mendocino and offer service. If that were to happen, then service would begin in June of next year. So there's a runway of time for regulatory reasons, for buying power, for formal noticing that requires a number of months before actually service would start. And so one of the items, this is a table, and pardon the small numbers, but this is a table showing how the voting shares in the Sonoma Clean Power Board of Directors could potentially, or would potentially change if Mendocino were brought in under the current proposal before our board. And what voting shares are used for is all items have to require a majority vote to pass on our board. If a member of the board wishes to veto an item, they can call for what's called a weighted vote. And the weight is based on how much energy their city uses relative to the whole territory. And so Santa Rosa, being a large city, has a large weight to its vote. And today, the voting shares of Santa Rosa are 33% of the total vote. What would materially change if Mendocino were to come in with all the cities is that many of the jurisdictions' voting shares would shift downward. The ones that are at 1 still round to 1. But Santa Rosa's voting shares would go from 33% to 29%. And what that really materially means is that Santa Rosa would need 4% more, I believe, to veto a change to the JPA, rather than just 1% more. And so this gets a little detailed, but I wanted to leave this up because I know Councilmember Wysocki had expressed some concern about the weighted voting shares of Mendocino with an expanded program. So I wanted to, in case there's some questions, I think that's useful, and we can come back to that. The final slide I have is that expansion to Mendocino would increase our total energy that we sell by about 19%, and service would start next summer, and that the costs associated with that planning, the regulatory updates, the staff time, and so forth, would be more than met, in my view, by deferring any incentive-based programs in Mendocino by a period of 1 year. So we currently are planning an incentive-based program for electric vehicles, for example, and rather than offering that immediately in Mendocino when they start, we would defer that by a year and then use that period of time to collect net revenues to fund the startup. And the long-term impact is fairly good. I actually think that having a slightly larger customer base and load is very good from a regulatory standpoint. We represent more of a population. And it's also good in a small way as far as price. We actually believe that having that additional volume could produce a very small savings on cost over time. And so that concludes the update, and I wanted to see if there are questions at this point.
Thank you for your presentation. Council, questions? I have a couple, but. Mr. Wysocki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Mr. Cyphers, Mr. Shoup for being here, and for a third of the staff. I see that's quite a turnout, and I do appreciate the job that's been done. What I'm unclear of, and I want to make sure that, because I didn't see any projections on Mendocino expansion to the board. Did the Business Operations Committee get any projections on the Mendocino expansion as to financial effects?
So not in terms of tables showing new budgets, but in terms of impacts to energy costs and impacts to rates, we did provide projections. And so the summary of those items is that we project that over the next 2 years, there wouldn't be a measurable impact to rates or net income. The error in our model is bigger than the forecast change. The long-term prognosis, so looking 3 years and out, it looks like there could be approximately 0.5% of rate savings associated with expansion.
But I don't recall seeing that. We might have had a quick presentation, and I've had people tell me from Business Operations they didn't see it.
Yeah, it's in the text of the report, but we didn't produce new budget tables on that basis.
And then on the Mendocino County expansion, which I think is a good thing under certain conditions, we only had the extended discussion in July. Prior to that, it was just a kind of a want, for lack of a better term. Was there any other extended discussions that I may have missed?
Well, my recollection is that the board recommended changes to the JPA in anticipation of Mendocino back in December of last year. I'll turn to my staff to see if they have better, more clear recollections. But we have had a number of board meetings, maybe 5 or 6, where this was an item on it. I didn't bring that list, but I may be better asking other board members for this or looking at the agendas.
I just wanted to help frame that, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'll have other comments.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I just have some process questions. When you talked about the 2 committees going into one, does that mean the numbers is going to be 1 committee comprised of the exact same members that used to be 2 committees, or are some off, and if so, who's going to reconstitute the board?
Yeah. So
or the committees?
So the board chair and vice chair of our board has been tasked with identifying how to reconstitute that committee or constitute it. We've had an initial meeting. I think it's their news to reveal kind of what their plan is to the board, but my expectation is that at least a significant number of the current members of both committees would be serving, and the JPA reflects that, the edit, in that it says that the new committee can be up to 11 people, which would accommodate all but 1, and we know at least 1 member wants to go off. So I think it's fair to say that could happen.
And did I hear you correct when you said each of those 2 committees are recommending this change. We just ought to combine the two of them.
Unanimously, yes.
Okay. And then I heard you say the Mendocino emphasis went from 4 potential votes to 2. Who made that recommended change?
The board. So that came from the board. Every piece of this related to representation and voting has come from the board and not from staff.
Okay. And
That's
did
a
I hear you
policy
also?
question.
Exactly. I just wanted to clarify. And did I hear you correctly say that this has already been to Mendocino, and Mendocino is okay with the weight of their vote with what's presented before us?
It is, and I will say that the incorporated cities have all generally commented that they're not thrilled with the idea that they don't all get a seat, but so far as I can tell, they would be okay with that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Combs?
Thank you, Mayor. So first off, thank you. Amazingly successful program. Really like the photovoltaic stuff that you're bringing forward. That's such a neat thing. And one of my themes has been conservation as a source, and really want to emphasize I'm looking forward to seeing how we move conservation forward as a group. The fuel switching, I'm hoping at some point that our city bus will be interested in working with you regarding fuel switching. Hint, hint, to staff. And I'm looking forward to that. I also want to thank you because I've had a resident who contacted me because she was confused about how much her solar bill, her electric bill had gone up. And she was going to blame Sonoma Clean Power. And she called your helpful staff, and they assisted her in determining that her solar panels were not working properly. And she got someone out to fix them. And I genuinely believe she would not have found out without your helpful staff assisting her. I don't think she would have known based on her history with PG&E. So I want to thank you for that customer service in the back row up there. Thank you. I have some questions about the point at hand, and I appreciate your patience with me on it. Can you explain to me, just first off, really simple-minded question here, why are we not offering service without offering votes? Why not just provide service to Mendocino as Sonoma Clean Power? So really fundamental question.
The answer to that is that under the existing JPA, anytime a new entity comes in, they get a seat on the board of directors. And the reason for that was back when we first adopted the JPA, you'll recall that not all the cities in Sonoma County came in the first wave. And so that was set up, for example, for Petaluma and Roanoke Park and Cloverdale, who came in later, so that they would be assured that if they voted to come into Sonoma Clean Power, they would automatically get a seat on the board of directors. So right now, absent a change to the JPA, if our board were to vote to let those entities come in, they would get 4 seats on the board because that's the way the current JPA is worded.
Why haven't you brought to us, again, I'm asking a really simple question, why haven't you brought to us a JPA amendment that clarifies that it's cities, however recently incorporated, to accommodate newly incorporated cities, just cities in Sonoma County, because it's Sonoma Clean Power?
Yeah, I think the general notion is if we're going to charge rates to ratepayers, some level of representation is reasonable. I think it was generally discussed as being a problem to set rates without any representation. I think that was the fundamental nature of it.
Okay. I appreciate that we need to be upfront with what we're talking about is if you don't have the CPUC to go to for a public complaint process, then you need representation. And that's my understanding of what we're talking about. So, and then the question becomes, how do we weight representation? And my understanding was we had set up weighted voting. And I'm a little confused about what we'd set up weighted voting for. I have the impression that we'd set up weighted voting for more than we may be seeing weighted voting for. Can you clarify that?
The weighted voting structure really came about as a result of kind of negotiations that happened during the startup phase.
I was there.
Yeah, it was an attempt really to accommodate the differences between big jurisdictions that wanted to have, you know, the larger jurisdictions didn't want to have just one director, one vote. The smaller jurisdictions, on the other hand, wanted to have a seat there. The weighted voting was a sort of way to split the difference. It allowed the larger jurisdictions to retain some of the force of the fact that they were larger by having a larger weighted voting share. That's essentially how it came about
Is the
originally.
weighted voting required for changing the JPA?
The weighted voting process is part of the JPA right now.
But
That's not what I asked.
I understand your question. So, no, you can change the JPA with a 2/3 majority of the directors, and that's how anything would be passed, would be a simple majority, or in the case of a JPA, 2/3 majority. The weighted voting is only used to veto something. No? No. Oh, okay. Being corrected.
No, the weighted, actually, the weighted.
I appreciate your expertise in this. I would like to ask my city attorney if she would like to weigh in.
Under the JPA, there are two different provisions. The one that deals with amendments to the JPA requires a 2/3 vote of the directors. But if there's a demand by any director, then the action can be improved, or so the amendment could be approved by both a 2/3 vote of the directors as well as a 2/3 vote of the directors holding at least 2/3 of the voting shares. So it's a combination of a supermajority, both in terms of number and in terms of weight.
Is that your understanding also?
There's one more provision
Please.
that also has
Relevance?
a weighted component to it. Under Section 3.1 of the JPA, if there's going to be a new participant, like what is being proposed, there is a requirement that there be a simple majority of the directors who vote, but once again, upon the demand of any director present at the meeting, the inclusion of the new participant must be approved by both a majority vote of the directors and a majority vote of the directors having a majority of the voting share. So the difference between those provisions is that the weight required for an amendment to the JPA is a supermajority in all respects, and the vote required for inclusion of a new applicant is a simple majority in all respects.
Thank you for clarifying that for me, because I was a little confused about where we were on that. I'm hoping that I'm less confused now. Okay. I think I need to hear comments from my other council members. The chart that you've provided with the numbers on it, if you don't mind showing it again. In this chart, our current voting shares, we would need one more. Essentially, we need another city to go with us.
Correct. For a JPA, to block a JPA amendment,
Right.
you would need one more jurisdiction.
With Mendocino County, we need maybe 4.
You could have
Well,
Santa Rosa with Roner Park.
4 points.
Santa Rosa, yeah, 4 more points, exactly.
If we add the 2/3 and the majority provisions in, can you give me an idea how that looks? Because I'm having trouble doing that math in my head looking at this chart.
I think she thinks that it should
I think if you're saying you're in a situation where you have an amendment to the JPA, which would require more than a simple majority, it requires a 2/3. So that would be just shy of 67%. If I'm understanding this correctly, given this chart, Santa Rosa's weight is 33% of the total, so you would need another 34%. So depending on which jurisdictions there are, how they add up, if you had the unincorporated areas of Sonoma County, that would get you 68, you'd be above the 2/3 mark. If you had a smaller jurisdiction, such as Roner Park, that wouldn't be enough to get to the 2/3. And then to back up if you're in a situation where you have just a majority vote, so inclusion of a new participant, you'd only have to reach the 50% mark. So Santa Rosa would only need an additional 18 votes to get there.
And if we brought Mendocino in as shown, can you help me with that rundown?
Well, you would then be, if I'm understanding this correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you'd be 29%.
And there's one small correction to what you said accurately before, is that in order to pass a change to the JPA, you also need the popular vote.
Yes.
You can't do it on a weighted vote alone. So that was the protection for the small cities.
And can I add just one other thing to make it even more complicated? There's a provision in here that talks about a situation where there's a 2/3 vote. Because Santa Rosa had 33% and presumably could alone block something, there's an additional provision in here that says that if the person voting against something that requires a 2/3 vote has more than 1/3 of the voting shares, then they need one additional person besides them in order to stop that from going through. So your 33% right now wouldn't necessarily be able to block a 2/3 vote anyway.
Right. Okay. Did you finish? I just
I
wasn't
think
sure if I interrupted you.
So I completely agree that this is sort of the modern version of the Great Compromise, right? We have the House and the Senate here. We need a vote from both. So if we're talking about strictly the weighted vote requirement, leaving aside the sort of requirement that you need a majority of the directors regardless of the weight, if you are looking at the scenario with Mendocino, if I'm understanding this correctly, Santa Rosa would have 29% of a weighted vote. So you would need 4 more weighted percentage points to achieve your goal in that scenario than you would under the current scenario. So depending on which other cities or jurisdictions were partnering with you in your vote, how many you would need.
If this
Thank
may
you.
help, on that one meeting that you and I both attended, when we joined Sonoma Clean Power, weighted vote was part of the precondition, one of the 2 main tenets for us to come in. And what I recall was that it was a lot simpler on all material matters on the JPA. And that's not what I see in the JPA. And I know that's what's in the JPA, and there's nothing that we can do about it. But what we voted on that night and what I was reading is different.
This isn't exactly how I remember it either, but I have not reviewed the film.
I do have the resolution that approves the JPA, and what is in the resolution is consistent with what's in the JPA, which is a slightly different issue than is being raised.
I was talking about the discussion
Right.
during the vote.
Are you finished, Councilmember Combs? Certainly. Okay. Mr. Oliveras.
Thank you. You're asking for direction on 2 items. It's the revision and the Mendocino piece. Related to the revisions, can you share with us the history related to the board requirement of elected officials, and maybe a little bit more on the justifications to why Roanoke Park would not want to do that?
Well, the second question is easier, which is that Roanoke Park currently has a staff member serving. Director Don Schwartz is an assistant city manager in Roanoke Park, and he's serving on the board. So that's an easier question to answer. The first one is that our board, during the course of a meeting, introduced that item, and it was news to staff, and so that was direction from the board down to staff to include that edit. I do not know the origin of that. The discussion, as I recall it, and maybe Director Wysocki can help me with this, is that directors wishing to have only elected officials expressed an interest that elected officials are more accountable to the public, and the public are our ratepayers, and there was a better nexus in that. I think that's a fair summary.
Yeah, I would just add that what I brought to that discussion was that each jurisdiction should be allowed to decide whom they wanted to have represent them. But The reason why I requested this session here is we do need to guide our vote on that, and that is part of it, but that's the genesis of that.
Got it. So you're suggesting that we would want to leave it to the cities to decide whether they want an elected
Oh,
official?
no, I'm
or-
suggesting it's none of our business what Winter Park or any other
Okay,
jurisdiction
got
wants
it,
to
got
do.
it, okay, got it, okay. Then related to the Mendocino piece, I would assume, you showed us the map of California, that our goal is to have community choice be the standard of California. Is that the long-term goal?
I think given the environmental and economic benefits it's brought so far, I think that's a good goal, yes.
Okay. So for Mendocino then, what other alternatives do they have besides joining Sonoma Clean Power?
So they've analyzed those alternatives pretty closely. So they've looked at forming their own program. They've done a study on hiring a private company to serve their territory, and possibly getting together with Lake or Humboldt counties as a joint program. And they've concluded those are not their best options. I should add, we actually have been doing outreach with them and Humboldt and Lake and Alameda and 15 other counties around the state with the goal of helping other regions get started without our service. And that is our first line of support, is we want to help you get started, we want to help you get this kind of benefit, but we don't really have an interest in serving the state of California. Mendocino really did conclude that those other options weren't good for them, in part because of limited staff and budget, in part because of the technical nature of the work and needing to have good high-level oversight of whoever is doing that work, and the difficulty of attracting talent to Mendocino. So I think that they've made a request that I believe feels like an informed request after looking at the alternatives.
So I guess it would be safe to say that they smaller populated counties may not have the capacity to do something on their own. They would have to pool or look to join an existing.
I think that is very accurate, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Corsi.
Thank you. Can we go back to that chart for a minute? I want to make sure I understand that right now, unincorporated Sonoma County has 35%, but they need one more entity to go with them on a vote to achieve that, more than a third.
To block a two-thirds
to block a vote.
Yes, any
Okay.
two-thirds vote could be blocked by Sonoma +1
Okay,
or Santa Rosa +1 today.
all right.
Yeah.
Going back to your slide 7 on the revisions to the agreement, on point number 3, you mentioned that there were Brown Act problems or Brown Act concerns. Can you expand on that a little bit and tell us what the problem is there?
The process that we have set up right now relies on an ad hoc, a procurement, what we call a procurement ad hoc committee, which is a committee comprised of members of the Business Operations Committee and some of our board of directors. They basically review procurement decisions that staff is going to make. The Brown Act concern is that that ad hoc committee, as you know, an ad hoc committee can only be for a limited subject matter in a limited period of time. And so we're now at a point where we really don't feel like we can keep that short-term committee going any longer because it won't be short-term. And so that's really the reason that the change is proposed, really to try to, not only that, but also to streamline the procurement process and to get the board of directors itself to adopt sort of criteria around energy procurement. We think that's an important thing for the board to do, and so it's sort of those two things combined are the reason why we're doing this.
I'm not understanding whether this streamlining is to have these decisions covered by the Brown Act or exempt from the Brown Act.
It's basically to have the board delegate to staff the ability to enter into power contracts that fall within the criteria and parameters that the board of directors sets.
All right.
Whereas right now it goes to goes through this ad hoc committee.
Okay. On the issue of elected or non-elected officials on the board, has not having an elected official from one of the cities caused any problems with the inability to vote or make decisions? And I'd also like to hear this from our representative too. I'm seeing it, the
Yeah.
east-west shaking of the heads there, and
Yeah,
that's fine.
I'm not aware of any issues like that.
Okay. And you're estimating about 2% savings for customers now, and that would rise to 2.5% after a few years
So-
with Mendocino on board?
So the baseline savings fluctuates pretty significantly because PG&E's rates go up and down rather dramatically. And because we look at the total bottom line of a bill, we never compare our charges compared to PG&E's generation charges. We compare bottom line costs on the bill because that's the only thing customers care about. So when we talk about 2% savings today, that's all the electric charges combined. That number does change typically every 2 to 3 months because PG&E's rates are changing that frequently. Our rates change once a year. And so that number will change, but whatever that future number is, we forecast would be about 0.5% better due to the expansion
It's simply because of the scale.
because of scale, yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I don't want to overplay that. That's a small savings, but it's a savings.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Wysocki.
I did have one other question. If you could go back to the slide showing the voting shares and the weighted.
Yeah.
You'd stated earlier that under the current JPA that 4 seats would come in.
Yeah.
And that you revised that. That's one of your additions. It appears that the weighted voting was not considered for revision.
Can you explain what you mean?
Well, your four board seats, 4 regular board seats were going to come in.
This was at the direction of the board. This was not staff.
No, I
driven.
understand
So,
that,
yeah.
but weighted votes weren't brought up for consideration. And so those haven't really changed.
Neither were board seats. The board drove this process, not.
I understand that, but the point was made that regular board seats went from 4 to 2.
Yeah.
But the weighted of those, the weight of Mendocino's seats has stayed the same.
It's true, there has not been a discussion at the Board of Directors about changing the weighted voting portion of Mendocino County's.
And that's the impression I wanted to correct here, that perhaps we're already pulling back from Mendocino County, but in fact, under the weighted provisions, we're not at all.
I have a question concerning the melding of the 2 committees. Is there, and this is coming from, I had a conversation with the representative from Rohnert Park, Don Schwartz, and I'm curious, and his argument resonated with me that having the ratepayer advisory have one more seat on that subcommittee. I know that there are 2 major themes that Sonoma Clean Power sold to the community, if you will, as we were going down this process. One is being more responsible with our energy and who we purchased it from who we purchased it, and also the rate discussion. The rates were always touted as, and by the way, it's going to be cheaper and at the same time more responsible. But the concept of having one more seat, basically a majority on that subcommittee of the ratepayer or of those 2 committees combined, I don't see a problem with having one more seat being concerned with ratepayers, the ratepayer issue. Do you see a downside to having that majority weighted to the ratepayer side?
No. And I think that one of the elements that we're bringing to our board is language that Don Schwartz has proposed, indicating that a majority of the members of that committee have a ratepayer interest and concern. I think that's something that makes sense to me as well.
Okay, thank you. The other piece was as far as the jurisdictions being able to dictate who the representative is on the JPA, and that has, although I know that causes some electeds frustration, I have found on my experience on the JPA with the waste agency a great deal of thoughtful comment coming from Mr. Schwartz when dealing with various issues. And I agree with Councilmember Wysocki that I think jurisdictions should be able to, at least I haven't been convinced that they shouldn't be able to have the opportunity to choose their own representative. I think that's, I don't have any other questions. We have 3 cards from the members of the public. If we can move to public comment, and then I'll entertain a motion. Mr. DeWitt. Oh, you're on your regular, I'm sorry. Madam Secretary, do we have? Nothing? Okay. So let me entertain a motion, and then we will go to final comment before giving our representative direction. And Mr. Wysocki, you have this item.
Well, it's a motion to provide, I'll read it in its entirety, to provide direction to its Sonoma Clean Power Authority Board of Directors appointee as to whether or not to amend the SCPA Joint Powers Agreement as proposed, and 2, to approve participation by Mendocino County and the cities of Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena. I would like to amend that to take into account our discussion, which we have yet to have. So I feel a little bit premature to say as proposed.
Okay. Why don't, well, we have to do this one step at a time, because I have some comments that I'd like to make regarding the motion. So if we could, for discussion's sake, do you want to just, or we can pass it to another council member?
No, I'll just say for discussion's sake as proposed with future amendments to forthcoming.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Second as amended.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry. The beginning of that motion wasn't really a motion because it doesn't actually provide the direction. It's just whether or not to give direction. So you would need to fill in the gap in there because you don't have any substance to the motion.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's have some more discussion. So
there you go.
That way we can get to the bottom of it. And I'm going to weigh in. I had a conversation with a long-term, with a resident who's worked on many, many boards and commissions over the years, and he had a couple of not concerns, but recommendations regarding bringing in Mendocino. And first of all, I want to start with saying I appreciate Councilmember Wysocki's willingness to bring staff here and to be able to have this conversation, because I think it is an important one. And I appreciate your concern, actually, especially when it comes to the concept of weighted voting. It does, although a small way, it does affect the influence that we have on that body. He brought 2 things to my attention that did resonate with me, and one was, of course, is the desire to reduce our GHGs, and the idea of expanding the communities that have the opportunity to, and in a way that they can actually afford, and that's reasonable and practical for them. Not all areas have the wherewithal to create this tool. And so for him, that was one of the more important and compelling reasons, was to have more people in the state to being able to take advantage of CCAs. The second piece was interesting to me, and what he said was that in his opinion, that by bringing on this large geographic area, that it actually increased the influence that our particular CCA had when approaching the CPUC on various issues. I mean, let's face it, PG&E does not always agree with the direction of the CCAs, and they can, at times, highly influence the CPUC when it comes to decisions they may make that could benefit a very large and for many a very respectable and respected corporation. So his thought was that it would indeed increase the influence of Sonoma Clean Power, and without, he did not have too much of a concern about the weighted voting, although he did bring it up, and it is an issue that I think we need to grapple with. But he felt that in the weight of the influence of bringing on a larger, or bringing on Mendocino, that was worth the gamble of losing a few points in the weighted voting, and of course toward the goal of reducing GHGs statewide. So he convinced me in a very short period of time that it was a reasonable thing to move forward and to give our representative the authority to vote to bring on Mendocino, and that's where I'm standing right now with this conversation. So I'll entertain other Mr. Oliveros.
Sorry, I agree, and if you would allow me, I would consider making a motion on this item. Just for the sake of discussion.
Well, actually, we're good. We're good for discussion now. I mean, we can keep going. So, do you have a sense of where you're going with this, Councilmember?
Well, I agree with your comments. That's why I wanted to move it forward.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Combs.
I have some concern, particularly in things like item 6. The report that we have does not include the specific language. So it's very hard to tell when we're giving the board discretion about how many board seats to offer, whether it is limited. Is this language limited to, I mean, can the board theoretically give 30 board seats? I mean, it's not, because we don't have the exact language in our package, at least I don't in my package have the exact language. It's really hard to see the fine tuning of each of these sections. And so we're relying on a lot of, I hope, work by our city attorney to ensure that what we are saying verbally, that our meaning is being conveyed into the document. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that because I think we had some previous difficulties with this particular JPA on that point. So with regard to number 6, I am willing to give the board discretion to provide fewer seats than the standard calculation, but I am unwilling to give the board wholesale discretion to make decisions about the number of seats. If you understand my meaning?
So I think I'm representing this accurately. I'm looking at council, not council member Hsu, to make sure this is right. But I believe what the language does now is it gives the board discretion without capping or without specifically addressing your concern. I think my personal comment is I don't think a board would be likely to give more board seats than one per jurisdiction, but
you know, we don't write laws on goodwill because we write laws for other reasons. We write ordinances for other. So I would not be comfortable going forward without clear language that there is a formulated cap and that we're giving the board discretion to go below that number.
Yeah, and I think I can answer the question. I did send a copy of the JPA amendments to staff.
I apologize that I do not have it in my materials to read.
But I will read the exact language. It says basically that the board shall determine pursuant to 3.1. 3.1 is a section that requires the board to approve any new members into the program. It says whether the participant shall be entitled to determine whether such municipality or county, in other words, a new member or any combination thereof, may appoint an additional member to the board of directors. So in other words, this language is saying essentially that right now that the board can determine whether or not they get to appoint any director to the board of directors. I don't read this language as enabling the board to say you can appoint 5.
So it's either 0 or 1.
It's either 0 or 1.
Okay.
Certainly that was the intent of the language, is 0 or 1.
I'm seeking guidance from my city attorney.
Can you tell me what section you're looking at?
I've got red line. It's 4.7 and about halfway down.
While our city attorney looking that up, just to clarify, on number 3 on the slide, we don't have that policy presented yet, correct?
That's correct. And
That's
so this-
consistent with the comment from my colleague, that
Yes,
policy is not presented.
I was going there. It's very uncomfortable for me to not have the written policy regarding the change in the process with the ad hoc committee, particularly because my understanding was that the ad hoc committee served an oversight function. So it's not clear to me, based on the literature, the materials that I have and don't have, who would be performing the oversight function and how it would be substituted.
And to be clear, that transition would not occur until a policy is adopted. So our board has anticipated that element as well. And the policy will be brought to the October board
I
meeting.
don't see how I can recommend a vote without understanding what the policy is I'm recommending a vote on. I just am not able to do that. I mean, I like this agency. I think it's great. You've done wonderful things. I can't move forward on item 3 without knowing what the policy is that we're giving approval to change to. So that's a concern of mine. In my own self, number 5, I think local jurisdictions should make the decision as to who they select, unless there's some really good reason that I'm not hearing and have not had presented to me today. With regard to 4, again, we don't have the specific language. As it was presented, it makes sense that there is a temporary need to make an adjustment and that there be a board review and approval after an X number of days without knowing the exact language.
So
Is that available?
it's a 90-day limitation, so it must be authorized by the board within 90 days. And the purpose of that is there are occasional months when our board skips a meeting. So the point is the next board meeting.
Okay, so I guess so. I have some mixed feelings about combining unless, as the mayor suggested, that there's an additional vote for the ratepayers. I appreciate that suggestion. My initial thought was not to like combining the two entities. And as a general comment, my understanding is that we had two sort of intention, well, a 3-part intention. We needed the agency to have good business operations, and we needed the agency to have a place where ratepayers could go and be heard and have a specific report regarding ratepayers occur. And then we also wanted to make sure that we reduce greenhouse gases. And it's not clear to me who's carrying the greenhouse gas part. So that's kind of weird that they're, I'm just reflecting, if you're making changes, who's carrying the part that makes sure we're meeting greenhouse gas stuff? Is there a committee? That's kind of a piece been lost. But putting I just want to make sure that if we're going to have a place where ratepayers feel heard, that the Business Operations Board, I'm uncomfortable with this combination. I could adopt the mayor's recommendation, but I could be persuaded otherwise, depending on what other council members are thinking.
So just so I'm clear, and we may have to break this up into a couple of separate votes or motions.
It looks
so that
like
you can give you an opportunity to vote yes on
Yes,
some.
I'd like to vote yes on something.
So if you could give me the numbers, I heard.
Number 1, I would like to hear from others and could be persuaded to do the +1 that you have suggested.
Thank you. And then the other
Number
was?
2, it says it clarifies the purpose, but we don't have language, so it's hard to be clear about it. Number 3, the oversight process for how this is going to happen without regard to the ad hoc. I can't vote yes on that at this point because we don't have language. Number 4, I'm okay. Number 5, I have a no. I think local jurisdiction should decide. And number 6, I just want to ensure that the language is limited and that there is a cap on it's no more than or something.
Okay, well, I'm all over the board on that, so I may not be able to give you the opportunity to break these up quite that much.
I'll help you.
Mr. Corsi. I'm sorry, actually, Mr. Vice Mayor had it next.
Ms. Strickland would like to say something.
Okay, sorry.
Under section 4.7, the revision would provide that if a new municipality or county outside of the jurisdiction were to be added, the Board of Directors shall determine whether such municipality or county or any combination thereof may appoint an additional member. It's limited to one. They're not 0 or 1.
Okay, then I withdraw my concern about item 6.
Thank you. And I had, Mr. Vice Mayor was next, and then, okay, Mr. Corsi.
Just on that point, would that be subject to the weighted veto? Subject to the weighted veto? The decision to offer new board seats?
That would be a majority vote. That would be subject to weighted voting if a director called for weighted voting on that. And if a director called for weighted voting, then you would need a majority of the number of directors and a majority of the weighted votes in order to approve it.
Thank you.
I think part of what was clarified for me in the weighted voting is that the weighted voting can be called for at any time on any decision that this JPA would make. And how many times has weighted voting been requested?
Once.
Okay.
In order to discuss weighted voting.
Okay.
So it's been used once. One more point of information, the duties of the ratepayer committee, all of those duties that the city of Santa Rosa approved prior continue to be the duties of the new committee. There's no change in the responsibility of that committee as far as ratepayer interest goes. So that is an enduring element of the new committee.
Okay. So I think and I know that it'd be nice to be able to accommodate Councilmember Combs in moving piece by piece, but I think what I'm going to do is in the spirit of being expeditious, is to entertain a motion. Mr. Wysocki, do you want to pass or make this motion?
Oh, no, I want to make the motion. I just think that we still have more discussion to be had, and we have 2 more council members to weigh in. So, no, I'm happy to be the representative. I'm happy to make the motion.
Mr. Corsi.
I'd like to hear Mr. Wysocki's amendment.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Vice Mayor, do you have, let's kind of just give us a sense of where you are with this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I was looking at this item, I look at the collective good, and as sometimes I've seen the larger entities think that they're always right, and I've experienced, Santa Rosa isn't always right on everything. And I appreciate the process that's been put in place so that if, let's say, whoever the representative from this board is, or on this council is on this board, if it looks like we're going to object to something, I think it's the responsibility of that person. I need to get fill in the blank. So again, from the process, whatever it is, I'm comfortable with what's been suggested before us. I do like on the 2 committees, combine them with the more emphasis on the ratepayer advisory. I think it should be the choice of the city, whether it's going to be an elected or an appointed. Let them deal with that. And I'd love to see Mendocino join us, because again, looking at it as a collective, the city of Santa Rosa, in my opinion, is not the center of the universe on this. And also with the benefits from Sonoma Clean Powder, they don't end, I think, at our county jurisdiction lines. I totally respect the different, the details here, but I also have an expectation and respect that whoever will be appointed to this committee from this council is going to be that subject matter expert representing our interests. That's kind of where I'm landing.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Wysocki, are you prepared to introduce a motion?
I am prepared to introduce a motion to accept the presentation and continue discussions concerning future policies to be presented at the Sonoma Clean Power Board. Because as we've seen, we still have policies to be presented on this matter. It's not fully fully vetted yet, in my humble opinion, when you're talking about giving voting shares to other entities, but you're silent to weighted voting. That's a serious omission. When you talk about adjusting the power contracting process, subject to policy adopted by the board, but the board hasn't seen it yet, that's a material omission. So this is the cart ahead of the horse. I am personally in favor of expanding to Mendocino County because I think we can give them the benefits of cheaper power and cleaner power. However, once they come in, we have changed one of the two principles that this council depended upon coming into this authority, and that is weighted voting and ratepayer protection. Now, the weighted voting has been used against many entities in this county, notably on the Transportation Authority, with the county having the lion's share. That's basically the genesis in my mind where it came from here. And I thought it would be broader. I do like the comment of the vice mayor. I agree that the benefit of the whole sometimes supersedes the benefit of the soul. But there's also a time to take a pause and make sure you're going in the right direction. This entity is 2 years old. It's very, very new. And just as quickly as we've had favorable rates, some unforeseen occurrence could give us unfavorable rates. We're up to almost $40 million in reserves in the interim statements, and that's a very good result. But this will also increase our exposure going the other way, just because we'll have a broader base. Ratepayer protection was also the other pillar that this council agreed upon as a precondition to joining. And while I like the fact that the new committee will still have that authority, I think it would be wise to have a subcommittee to deal with rates by themselves, because that is a very important element of this program. And if we lose sight of that, we will lose our customers, and this authority stops in its tracks. Because I firmly believe that we've got this high retention rate because we're cheaper than PG&E. Some folks come because we have greenhouse cleaner energy, but I would hazard to say that most of us that are in Sonoma Clean Power are here because it's cheaper. And that's something I would like to see in any JPA. So I think the discussion should be ongoing. I think it's a little premature to approve major amendments when policies haven't been presented. So that's why I asked for this presentation, but it's also why I want to keep the discussion going. I think that we have seen that there are still some policies that still need to be fleshed out.
So just for clarification, you are in favor of inviting Mendocino County in, but there are some issues around that invitation that have yet to be settled.
Not as presented.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Could I ask, if we did continue the discussion as we just heard suggested, what would be the consequences of that?
I might look to your council to tell you the consequences, but our board has asked, the Sonoma Clean Power Board has asked that this item be agendized for a vote on the October 13th board meeting. And so I do expect it to go to the board for a vote. And if there's more to say about consequences, I'll leave that to others.
And so again,
May I ask a follow-up?
just what I was hearing with what you just said, this item is giving direction to our director. So basically, our director would be at that October 13th vote without clear direction from this city council. Is that correct?
So yeah, so the amendments to the JPA could proceed without Santa Rosa's input or with one block. And service to Mendocino could be approved with a simple majority of the directors. But Steve Shute just reminded me that one other element is service to Mendocino, if it were pushed past the October 13 meeting, would be deferred by about 1 year. And there's an important reason for that. Beginning service at the beginning of the summer rate period, when commercial rates are much higher in the summer season, allows us to collect the net income to pay for bringing Mendocino into the program, in addition to what I mentioned about the program deferral. And so we wouldn't want to begin service at the end of summer or midsummer. We'd want to wait another year and start at the beginning of the summer of 2018. So there is another consequence, yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Combs?
So I wonder if I can clarify your motion or ask for some clarification of your motion. But before I do that, will item 3 regarding the new processes be available before October 13th?
Certainly, and at least a week before, based on our normal cycle. Also, I should be really clear, in case people were distracted by the other discussion that was going on, that any change in that process would still, at least it'd be my recommendation to the board, that there be no change made until a policy is adopted. So if our board chose to send the policy back to staff to say we want revisions to that policy before it's enacted, I would ask the board to continue the current practice until that policy is adopted. So there wouldn't be a period where there's no guidance from the board.
So I'm the alternate, so the direction is in some way to both of us. I would suggest that that we direct you to do the ratepayer plus one. Would you, that the clarification of purpose makes sense, the second item makes sense to go forward with? That we're okay with item 4, that we as a council don't support the local that we want local jurisdictions to decide. I think I heard that among us. I think your concern with number 6 now involves the weighted voting piece. So I would suggest that we say basically yes to 1 as amended for +1, yes to 2, and yes to 4.
Can I ask you to just amend it to say yes on number 1, +1, or a ratepayer subcommittee that shall report as its sole purpose? Because I saw a lot of nodding heads from the committee members when I brought that up.
+1 with a subcommittee, or
I don't think it needs to be, or
I would.
Or a separate.
I would defer to the mayor on that.
And could you clarify again, because you lost me on the
Well,
clarifying language.
it's either we add a subcommittee for rates only, which would just meet part of the year, that would be part of the regular committee, that would give the report to the board, or to have a committee that has a majority of, for lack of a better term, ratepayer advocates, which I hate to say, like, because they should be SCP advocates.
What I heard the staff say was that, in essence, there will be the same number of people on this committee as were on the 2 separate committees. The one change, so that their charge would continue as representatives of the former committee, separate committees. The only change that would be made, that we're hoping for, is that there would be that the majority of voting be ratepayer sensitive.
Well,
Can I clarify that? Because that isn't what I heard.
The mayor is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. And that gives me enough surety. I mean, I think that the protections are in place with this recommendation, as long as the ratepayer piece has I guess it would be 6.5, 7.6, but you've got a limit to how many people, so it sounds like a 6.5, 11 people on that particular subcommittee.
And that is the cap, is 11 people.
There you go. Okay.
So the
But we don't
+1,
know-
and we advise a subcommittee, and I would leave that in your,
Discretion?
yeah.
Thank you.
So that's number 1. 2 is yes, 4 is yes, 5 is no from our entity, as I hear us saying that we do want local jurisdictions to decide. That leaves 3, not having seen the document, I think I would leave it to your discretion also, because you will get it the week before, or the discretion of the voting person. 6, I'm open for suggestions on, because it's the one that involves adjusting the weighted voting as well as the seats.
Did you want me to respond? Because I'd be happy to restate it again. It was one of our concerns when we started this process. Every amendment to voting shares, especially the one that was presented, they just deal with regular votes and not with weighted votes. And weighted votes is where the true authority will be in the future to actually move material matters. Yes, it's only been invoked one time. I'm the one that invoked it, and I did it because the Mendocino County expansion I thought was moving rather quickly, as well as the consolidation of the committees was moving rather quickly. I'm afraid of losing that ability in the future. The town of Sonoma voted with me and shared that concern, and I have since heard from others that also share it.
Can I ask, if we have language where the board can make a yes or no decision, reducing the total from 4 to 2, can we put it in there that the board has discretion for the weighted voting to be proportionate to the number of seats, so that in this case the weight would go down 50% because the number of seats has gone down 50%? Do you understand? I'm looking for something that would allow that to happen.
In principle, yes, you could do that.
Would that be of interest to you?
It'd be of great interest to me.
So why don't we make it proportional to the board's allocation of seats? The weight of the voting becomes proportionate to the board's allocation of seats.
If I may, I understand what you're trying to achieve, but what you just recommended doesn't achieve that. If you make it proportional to numbers of seats, then Cotati will have the same voting shares as Santa Rosa.
I'm only talking about the new ones. Maybe I've misunderstood.
I think what may achieve the goal that you're trying to state is that you give the board discretion to allocate a weight to the voting share of new members, period. But not tie it to proportional to numbers of seats, because then I think you may be forced to provide more weight than you wish.
Thank you. Okay, I'm good with that.
And it still moves their invitation forward unless their agreement is conditional on the current recommendation. In which case we'll have to take 2 votes.
Well, I'm sure it is, but what I'm not sure of is whether they could act quickly enough to adapt to this change.
So I don't mean to interrupt, but I think we need to call for the question.
I think you need a second, and I think I'm the second.
Okay. Yeah, we do need a second.
As amended.
Yeah, and I do want to, I want to emphasize that I think I may know where this is going, that I very much appreciate Councilmember Wysocki's concern about how this board moves forward. It is a new board. Having Santa Rosa's interests protected is what you're talking about, and I very much appreciate that. But I think we need to let's give you some direction and.
Could we restate the motion? I lost that a little bit. Even if it's just framed on the 1 through 6.
My understanding is that the motion being made as amended is that we motion to provide direction to the Sonoma Clean Power Authority Board of Directors appointee to approve participation by Mendocino County in the cities of Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena, and amend the joint powers agreement in such a way that, for one, there is a +1 on the ratepayer side of that subcommittee. The committee, excuse me, +1 on the side of the committee.
So a majority of the committee shall be ratepayer advocates.
Okay, majority of the committee shall be ratepayers. 2, there's the clarification of purpose. We have left that untouched. With regard to item 3, we are giving discretion to our appointee. 4, we are leaving untouched. 5, we are recommending to our appointee a no, because we support local jurisdiction decision. And 6, we had amended language with regard to giving the board authority to amend discretion with regard to the weight as well as the number of board seats
Outside of Sonoma County. correct?
outside of Sonoma County.
And that has not, just for clarification, that is the piece that has not been agreed to by Mendocino
Correct.
at this point?
Correct.
Okay.
Is that clear? Okay.
I would like more clarification of the last item. You're giving the board discretion as to the weight and number of board seats.
Not the board discretion, the Santa Rosa representative.
We're giving discretion to the Santa Rosa representative, asking that the board have discretion about the number of board seats and the weight of the board seats for regions outside of Sonoma County. There's 2 levels of discretion.
But at the same time, we would need to, if there is not support at the board level for that at the end of that conversation, then we would need to give him the authority or the direction to vote for it as presented. That's the second piece. Giving him an ability, see what this does, it opens the door for him to be able to ask the board to discuss the issue and to bring it up. We also must, at the same time, even though there may be disagreement about this second piece, we need to give direction. If that conversation does not get traction on the board level, we would need to give our representative direction on how to vote on the issue finally.
My understanding
That's
was
how I'm looking at it.
we were directing approval of participation of Mendocino in the cities of Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena. So in some ways, that has an effect on that 6th item, because if we cannot get the negotiation step, we're directing approval.
You're authorizing participation. Absolutely.
Yes. But we are also recommending in your action, even though you are concerned about this recommendation, that you move forward per the recommendation of staff.
If that's where you want to go, then there's no discretion.
No, we want you to bring up the conversation. But if you don't, but if the traction is not, we don't want to use, in fact, let me just clarify this. If Councilmember Wysocki and Sonoma voted against, does the item fail?
The item to amend the JPA would fail. The question as to whether or not the board accepts Mendocino and the cities as members only requires a majority vote.
Simple majority.
Yes.
And no one could call for, but what if someone calls for weighted?
Somebody could call for a weighted vote on that question.
And in that case, it could fail. If Sonoma.
If a majority of directors or a majority of the weighted vote voted against it.
Right.
Which would not be achieved with Santa Rosa and Sonoma alone.
Okay.
Got that.
Okay.
You'd have the weight in that case, but you wouldn't have the pure majority.
Okay, got you. Mr. Corson.
I'd like to just make the point that I think that what you're suggesting would put our representative on the board in the position of making an argument, trying to get people to come on board with that argument when those people know that if they say no, that he has to vote their way.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So if
Well,
we're going to give discretion,
you're right.
we should give discretion.
Or not. All right, or not, right. Well, with all due respect to Councilmember Wysocki's concerns, I want to move forward with this, and that's my position right now. So on the amended piece, including the discretion, as
It's a two-piece vote. There's the amend the joint powers agreement, and then there's approve participation. So we have not made any changes to the statement approve participation.
Excellent. I have a motion and a second.
Okay, so
we clear?
Now we're clear, right?
What's that?
So your concern has been addressed. is what-
I believe it has. I just want to make sure that just for clarify, just to clarify, Madam City Attorney.
I would like a clarification of the last piece. If the delegate exercises his discretion and therefore votes no, is he still then voting to approve participation?
My understanding is how the motion has been made and seconded is yes.
Thank you.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Excellent. Then it's mine. We have a motion and a second. Council, your votes. And I have 6 ayes. Thank you. Sausage.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your patience.
Thank you. Moving to our public comment period, our first public comment period of the evening. I have 3 cards. Mr. DeWitt.
I have some graphics I've been setting up here to use the overhead. I've waited a couple hours. I was hoping you might be able to give me an extra moment today. One minute extra.
No.
No.
No. I don't think so.
Hard to get focused. My apologies. So what you have here, my name is Dwayne DeWitt, I'm from Roseland. What you have here is an aerial photograph from 1961 of Santa Rosa. That right there to the far side where my thumb is right here is what became Highway 101. The line down the middle is the smart rail now, and unfortunately it turns out that the labels can't be read very well, but you have Sebastopol Road right up here. This is Roberts Road coming down right here. This is the John Stewart property at the railroad, Railroad Square, Railroad Depot Park. Up here is the smart rail running right down here. Reason I show you that is because it's become an interesting topic for people in Roseland. I wanted to thank the council because back in 2015, you can see right up there, you folks had set your top priorities with the new city manager here, and transparency was one of the main things that you talked about, and I really liked that idea. 20 years ago, the city had designing our neighborhoods, Back to the Future, did good things, talking about positive things. One of the things that's really important is how we're going to design along the neighborhood of the Roberts Road area. And this right here, that was supposed to be a green line. That's the Joe Rodota Trail. For 20 years, the talk had been about running Roberts Road extension under the freeway, right there at that overpass. This is a map provided by the city of Santa Rosa. That red line is the Joe Rodota Trail. For talks for 20 years, it's been about having the road go under the overpass. But basically, back in July, at the Planning Commission meeting, the Rebel Gospel Mission had been talking with the planning department without the community being involved from the Roseland Specific Plan. And they've come up with an idea that they don't like that alignment anymore, and they've got a new idea. And that basically is that they may try to run this thing under or over Highway 12. That's a big expense. That's a big project. It's not in the deliberations that the Sonoma County Transportation just talked about. And basically, in the past, when a big thing such as the Hearn Avenue overpass, which is currently being discussed, or the Bellevue Road interchange, which hasn't gone very far after 15 years, these are multi-million-dollar projects, really big. And yet, for them to come at the end of the Roseland specific plan and say, oh yeah, we got a new idea. We're gonna run the road right there. And we're not going that way. And no public discussion with the design members from the Citizens Committee. Sad. Where's the transparency? My 3 minutes are up. That's most important to you. I'll return this back. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. T. Abram. Followed by Chris Manson.
Hello, thank you. My name is T. Abraham. I'm with the Hospital Council of Northern and Central California, and I'm going to defer to Chris on this one, and if I can, I think he's going to cover it quite well, and if he misses something, I'll be back.
Thank you. You want to reset the clock, Ms. Gomez? Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Chris Manson. I'm here on behalf of Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital. And basically, I'm just here today along with Kaiser, and also, as T mentioned, the Hospital Council of Northern California, to ask you to support, in whatever way the council deems appropriate, Proposition 52, which is on the ballot this year. And I'll just give you a little bit of background, and then I'll leave it at that, if that's okay. Today, more than 13 million, or 1 in 3 Californians, rely on Medi-Cal for their health care needs. It's more than 6.8 million children. Sonoma County is home to nearly 150,000 individuals enrolled in Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal pays pennies on the dollar to cover costs, just so everyone knows that. In fact, California is one of the lowest states when it comes to Medi-Cal reimbursement. In 2009, during the economic crisis, California hospitals partnered with the state to develop a program that would leverage hospital dollars to draw down critical federal matching funds for Medi-Cal. Because of this partnership, California has been able to receive billions of dollars each year in federal funding that provides health care for children and seniors. Since 2009, various iterations of the partnership have been approved by the legislature, not always on time, and often requiring retroactive action. In 2013, the legislature did pass a 3-year agreement that extended this hospital fee program until 2016. There wasn't a single no vote, and the governor obviously signed the bill. As a result of the partnership, we've been able to draw down over $3 billion a year. It's also, so of that $3 billion in extra Medicaid money, the majority of it goes to, follows the patients, it follows the Medi-Cal recipients, but a good chunk, about $800 million, also goes to the state of California and it's used for other health and human service programs. So it's definitely a positive for the state. Again, it's set to expire in 2016. For Santa Rosa hospitals, you're talking about $26 million, just to give you an idea on an annual basis. And so Prop 52, the Medi-Cal Funding and Accountability Act, is up this year on the November ballot. And basically what it does is it makes permanent this mechanism. So as long as hospitals are willing to go ahead and tax themselves to go ahead and draw down this federal match, there's a formula that's basically set in stone. The state will get a chunk, roughly, like I said, $800 million to $1 billion. We'll be able to maximize the amount of federal match, and that'll result in a few $1 billion going to Medi-Cal patients in the state. So we think it's a positive. It's helping us provide the care that we need to, especially given, again, the poor reimbursement that we get from programs like Medicare and Medi-Cal. So with that, I'll leave it there, and thank you for your time. So hopefully you guys can figure that out, or figure out whatever works for your process and possibly support Prop 52.
Thank you, Mr. Manson. Appreciate it. And
May I just add, just briefly?
You actually didn't speak before, except for about 20 seconds, so if you'd like to take...
Yeah, I just want to say at the end of the day, what Chris is asking is that you join, there's nearly 1,000 entities, and I'm talking bipartisan, labor, just about every hospital in the state. We're asking you to join on in that and join in that effort. As Chris said, there wasn't a single opposing vote when it went through the legislature, which is pretty rare. And I think it's something you all would want to be a part of, and I hope so, because we would love to add your name to the list of people that we're out there filling the radio and airwaves with. So thank you for considering it.
Thank you. And those are all the cards that I have, Council, at this point for this first part of our public appearances. And so we'll bring it back to the Council. Council, can I entertain a motion to put this on a future agenda for discussion?
I make that motion.
Thank you. And entertain a second? I'll second it if we don't. I'll second it. So we'll bring it back. During agenda review, we'll have that discussion. Back to my agenda. Moving on to, we have no public hearings, no written communications. The second and last public comment period. Would anyone care to, would you have any cards?
May I?
Sure.
May
Ms.
I ask a
Combs.
question about the list, which is shown on our agenda?
About the, I'm sorry?
It's a calendar list, future meetings calendar list. My question regards that I'm aware that the homeless subcommittee is hoping to bring recommendations back to council in a timely manner for avoidance of winter rains. And I was looking on the agenda and not seeing when that future agenda item was slotted in.
They haven't been slotted in yet because they're dependent on the recommendation, but we are well aware that those items will be needed to be added.
Okay, thank you.
So we're aware.
I just wanted to make sure there was a placeholder in someone's mind.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir.
Excellent, thank you. We're adjourned.